Hello strikers, after the last video part 1 of the black magic origin. Now, this is the second part. Various types of witchcraft and occult religious practices exist in Latin American and Afro-Caribbean cultures, known in Spanish as brujeria, pronounced. Influenced by indigenous religion, Catholicism and European witchcraft, the purpose may range from benevolent white magic to evil black magic. A male practitioner is called a brujo, a female practitioner is a bruja. Across the Afro-Latin diaspora, many forms of spiritual practices have emerged: Haitian voodoo, Cuban santeria, and Brazilian candomblé and umbanda. What sets the witches of Latin America apart from their European counterparts is the blend of religiosity and spirituality. The witches in Latin America's magic are rooted in African magic, European spiritualism, and Taino practices, making them practice an integrated version of spirituality. Isabel Zenon Cruz made the assessment that Puerto Rican vernacular religions, and really any Afro-Latino religions, have been only studied by folklorists but not comparative religionists due to classist and racist assumptions. Unlike many other Caribbean religions that derive from Africa, brujeria is not based on stable community, hierarchy, or membership. Instead, practices are more dependent on the ritual preferences of the actual participants. Because of the spontaneity of the spirits, it is impossible for institutionalized doctrines of worships to be enforced on followers and practices of brujeria within sacred altars of brujos, lessons of practitioners, and brujeria rituals lie ties to African ideologies, Catholicism, and Spiritism, explaining the erasure of hierarchical order before Spiritism was developed. Taino Indians and enslaved African people in Latin America developed the convictions that there exist spirits and those spirits can be communicated with. This becomes mixed with the convictions of spiritual worship introduced by Catholic colonizers. Early leaders of Spiritism found interest in brujeria amongst liberal, emancipation-minded groups in the late 19th century, begging the interest for further research of the correlation between politics and brujeria. The earliest witches date back to 931 BC, and from then on witchcraft has been spread throughout the world, and infiltrated many cultures. In Latin America, that influence did not come until the 1500s. When the Archbishop of Santo Domingo and 5th Bishop of Puerto Rico, Nicolas Ramos, recorded his recollections of black brujos, male and female, who engaged with the devil in the shape of a goat and, every night in front of this goat, cursed God, Santa Maria, and the sacraments of the Holy Church. Ramos wrote, asserting that they did not have nor believe in a god other than that devil. They performed these rituals in some fields. Apparently they were in a trance, not in dreams, since there were some people who saw them. These people, Ramos continues, tried to make them, the sorcerers, refrain from their doings through chanting and holy gifts, dadivas, and with all this information they came to me. This perpetual demonization of elements of African worship set up the forefront to the centuries of demonization of brujeria practices from the 16th to the subsequent 18th and 19th centuries. Slaves worshipped from Africa to Puerto Rico and Hispaniola and were forced to convert to Christianity by the imposing church and the overseeing hacendados, landowners. Branded slaves were baptized to be fully recognized as the property of hacendados in the late 1800s to early 1900s. During the early days of American occupation within Cuba, there were established attacks to undermine the legitimacy of several Afro-Cuban institutions and organizations, including Brujeria. With the growth of a single Cuban identity came a greater appreciation for conformity and deviation from creolized manifestations. However, their declination of faith-based practices in Cuba due to the rise in Marxism from 1959 to the 1990s lead to practitioners of Afro-Cuban religions to have to find innovative ways to survive Castro's political informants that particularly called for the suppression of witchcraft and brujeria. The introduction of Spiritism in the 20th century attracted more participants of all racial backgrounds. It also added new foundations of practice and ritualistic objects such as santiguos, healing blessings, 19 despojos, spiritual cleansings, prayers, and spells, and an array of indigenous, medieval Catholic, and African offerings. The Brujas inherited traits from Catholicism, and yet the Church had deemed them as evil and demonized them. In some places, their demonetization has come to an end on this scale, and they are left as they are, but in others, Brujas are forced to not practice their form of magic. That being said, with the increasing rate of persecution amongst practitioners since the colonization of the Afro-Latino Caribbean, Brujeria has been forced into modernization to combat erasure as separatist ideals begin to gain more momentum, particularly in Puerto Rico. The becomes more clings to cultural nationalism, including clings to aspects of Afro-Boricuintano folklore. Previously, 1950s 1960s, journalists in the island denounced brujeria as a way to help educate the masses. However, the shift in cultural nationalism from the 1980s onwards now leads to media outlets uncovering hidden traditions of the endangered Puerto Rican, Hispanic, Taino, and African traditions. Romberg argues the practice of modern-day brujeria as the vernacular co-optation of discourses of interest and passions, of consumerism and spirituality, commodity fetishism and morality, and welfare capitalism and magic. And also reveals that despite misconceptions, brujeria builds to social order through both holistic or individualized types of intervention and endorsement of positive mainstream social values. Brujeria doesn't participate in community, hierarchical, or initiation-based practice or membership. Rituals are interdependent on the procedures, practices, and attitudes passed down by its participants and heavily depend on forces of nature and the spontaneity of the spirits. Following specific guidelines and doctrines in brujeria is possible. However, some commonalities include basic ritual gestures, communication during divination, possession, and specific components of altars. These similarities are often referred to as a kind of spiritual lingua franca, which explains the ubiquity of the practice across the Afro-Latino and non-Afro-Latino diaspora. In practice, Brujas stress to not believe in the ritualistic objects or hold too much pertinence in the material representations of the spiritual entities, but rather focus on the messages and powers of the entities that inhabit these icons that are also used to summon ancient demons. Power is sensed and manifested when the voices of spiritist entities, Santeria Orishas, and the recently deceased are brought on by brujeria rituals, divination, trance and the making of magic works. Their spirit's abstract means of revelation include through emotions, through senses, and through healings as a means to transform the emotional, proprioceptive and, to some extent, physiological states of participants, whereas a lot of focus within the practice of brujeria is on the technological systems. Brujeria focuses mostly on interpersonal client-patient power that emerges during healing, divination and magic rituals. Challenges the assumed precondition specifically in regards to health, labor, family relations, and even career management. Brujos and practitioners of Brujeria never question the spirits. The performative methods of surrender training is the only lesson Brujos aim to teach. The expectation is to have faith in the spirits, and the spirits will theatrically reveal what is meant to be shown,